right, so we're finally going to finish this little book. It's been five. This is going to be the fifth reading. Um, Anybody who wants to or who has missed the last readings can go onto our YouTube channel, listen along to the previous discussions over the last few weeks. You could also get in Defensive Common Sense online in the description box of this video. Keep in mind, I think that as we read the last three chapters, the thing to keep in mind is what we're zeroing in on is this idea of common sense as something more than, like, we often use the term, hey, where's your common sense? You know, uh, you're boiling, I don't know, think of something dumb that somebody does. I for some reason can't think of an exact. Luke, help me out here. When would you use the term popularly, use your common sense? Nah, you're on mute.
You should put the toothpaste on the toothbrush before you brush your teeth, not after.
Use your common sense. Okay, good. So obviously there's a higher idea of common sense that LaRouche has been trying to define in the course of these different chapters, taking us through explorations in philosophy and physical space-time. And it's always to get at the idea of what is common. Is there a sense that's common in all babies, irrespective of where you're born, what time you're born, whether you're born 1,000 or 10,000 years ago, or 20,000 years in the future, whether in Africa or Europe or wherever? Is there a common sense that every baby has that is a potential that has to be cultivated in order for that baby as a young person, a young man or woman, to actualize their potential as part of the universe, right? So that means we have to know, since we are part of the universe, our subjectivity, our emotions, all of these things are created as a part of the universe. What is the nature and structure of that universe that we're born into, that we participate in? So that we know that when we do make changes to ourselves and to this system that we're a part of as an economic system, which is not just money, right? This is about the relationship of how human beings relate to the past, the future, to the different minerals on the periodic table of elements, which are different today than they were 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Our relationship to all of these dynamics are changing. And the one thing that's constant is that every time we make a successful eureka that's applied to society in the form of technological and scientific progress, if it's done in a certain type of way, we can have more of our people that can be sustained at a higher quality of life with greater access to their creative powers of thought. Obviously, we were just talking about slavery. And if you were living in a slave economy where the slaves are expected to labor 16 hours a day, they're not going to be able to develop those metaphysical powers of thought that were latent in them as a baby. And same thing for the masters, right, of the slave plantation. Those masters are completely lethargic. All of their creative thought is going into thinking about different ways to keep their slaves under control. So even their natural, beautiful powers of goodness are not really being expressed as they get more encrusted in that system that they then perpetuate, right, and pass on to their kids, carry forward. So it's a complete destruction of that natural potential. So what we're now getting into, we went through, I think the last chapter was a dense one on the Parmenides paradox, isochronicity, and least action, going through certain suppressed discoveries of the nature of physical space-time and how space is organized in certain harmonic ways, both in the orbits of the planets around the sun, which also reflects down into the microcosm. We could probably find similar harmonic action pathways of least action principles occurring around the orbits of a nucleus, and in a variety of ways inside of cellular biology, and as well as evolutionary growth. So it's there. If you have it in your mind, you will find it. If you believe that the universe is chaotic and random, it could be right in front of your face and you won't see it. And that's part of the battle in science today. People are really educated by the time they come out of university to presume that what their senses show them as a beauty of a flower or the seeming organized ordering of states of matter, right, into wholes that are more than the sum of their parts. That's just an illusion. The real, in the mind of a lot of the modern physicists coming out of university and going into their career, they have been led to believe that really it's chaos and random either mutations genetically in life or random movements of subparticles in the small that are really at the heart of causing what seems to be order. So we want to get over that. This next section is called On Human Morality. Then we have something called the individual and
mortality.
society. And finally on agape. And then the book is over.
Did you hear me, Matt?
What did you say?
On human mortality.
That too. That too.
No, that's what's written, no?
Oh, I know. On human mortality, yes. Okay, so like usual, we'll have a different person speak for each chapter, and anytime you want to stop, ask a question, please do. And yeah, I'm confident we're going to get through this today. So I'm going to do a screen share. All right, who wants to begin on human mortality?
Yeah, I can start.
All right.
All right. Chapter 11 on human mortality. A famous fool said, "I think, therefore I am." An utterly degraded wretch insisted that self-interest is defined by the seeking of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. An individual mortal life is a moment between conception and death. All sensual pleasures and pains, memories, are impaired with the deceased. What is there of value in such mortal human individuals that society should consider the existence of any among them worth tolerating? The definitions of self by Descartes or Adam Smith put mortal individuals on no higher level than a talking swine. The essence of the mortality of the person is that life is brief. Once that life had ended, what value persists for the society? What such value to society inheres potentially in an individual life that society might desire the conception, birth, maturation, and adulthood of yet another such individual? Do we not touch here again the complementarity, the sameness of isochronicity and natural law? The self-interest and the proper definition of individual personal identity is rooted in the quality of being human, that which distinguishes being human from being that which is most nearly human but is not human. It is sufficient that this distinction be that which separates mankind from all the species and varieties of beasts. That distinction is defined as mankind's capacity for generation, transmission, and efficient assimilation of scientific and technological progress. By efficient assimilation, we signify the effect of increasing potential population density as we have defined successful survival. In first approximation, that distinction is a singularity, as illustrated by the singularity of the transformation T, A arrow to B. It is that singularity which reflects the essential functional difference between mankind and each and all species of beasts. This singularity sets mankind absolutely apart from and absolutely above all of the species of beasts. By its nature, this transformation and its associated singularity are the activity of the mental life of a human individual, and thus set each individual apart from and finite in respect to each and all other persons in all history and for all future time. Here lies the key to the nature of individual personal identity. As the definition of the identity of the individual personal self delimits the definition of self-interest, this singularity provides the delimiting definition of the distinctions and the finiteness of individual self and of individual self-interest. This singularity could not exist but to the degree that it is brought into existence and also nourished into persisting existence by, and as the nonlinear form of activity typified by, the transformation T, A towards B. The existence of self and the existence of fulfillment of individual personal self-interest each lies within the process of developing and expressing the capacity expressed as the activity of generation, transmission, and efficient assimilation of scientific and technological progress.
Sorry, just having trouble here. And for anybody who might be listening online, we're all very familiar with this idea since we've been reading it. But when he talks about transformation A to B, it's one system to another system. So he gave examples of, take a snapshot at any moment on a human species timeline, and there's different, let's say 1200 AD versus 1700 AD. And you could measure out, based on that society's rate of technological development, and also its relationship to the discoveries it has and the elements on the periodic table, you can measure relatively how many of the species can be sustained at that rate of progress. And if you introduce a new idea like a discovery of, let's say, of astronavigation, that new idea, that new discovery gives you a greater power of movement and a greater power to enhance your species' ability to sustain itself, or electricity, or any discovery you wish. And we're the product of trillions of discoveries of the past. So just have that in mind when you see these terms like T, transformation A to B.
Okay. If and when this activity is viewed in the narrowest sense of scientific and technological progress, we see but an aspect of a larger process. It were better said that we are viewing then but one facet of this precious gem. It were permissible to announce now that all other facets of the gem cohere, as if by constructive geometric hereditary principle, with the qualities of the facet upon which our attention is now more narrowly focused. The generation, transmission, and assimilation of scientific progress occurs by and among individual human minds. The occurrence of the transformation function, typified by T, A to B, must be initially as generation, as the internal activity of an individual human mind. It can occur in no other, no different way. The receipt of the transmission is by the individual mind, and the efficient assimilation as transformed human behavioral disposition is also by the individual human mind. In short, the occurrence of the singularity T from A to B typifies that within the individual's mental life, which sets the human species apart from and above each and all of the species of beasts. At this juncture, let us detour but slightly and momentarily to register an important point respecting the definition of true common sense. Common sense does not lie within the domain of deductive logic. That on which the species nature of persons and society depends, essentially, absolutely, is the proverbial essence of the sort of nonlinearity which defies comprehension by deductive methods. So we must contrast true reason to mere logic. That which exists above and beyond the grasp of mere logic, and yet governs a sound logic, is reason. This metalogical, metaphysical domain of reason is typified by that activity of efficient scientific progress which causes a general increase of society's potential population density, and accomplishes this as formal deductive logic does not permit such a beneficial result. So, since successful survival of society depends upon this higher nonlinear agency, the quality of reason, true common sense, must be nothing other than a common disposition for the rule of individual social behavior by reason. Reason as opposed to Adam Smith's empiricist hedonistic irrationalism, and as superimposed as higher authority upon mere logic. That definition, although not adequate, is useful in a preliminary way. Focus now upon the paradoxical relationship between the person and society. Consider, first, the simpler aspect, and later, the isochronicity which binds the person of the present to the society of past and future, in addition to the present. Potential population density is a characteristic of the society as a whole. It determines how many persons may exist and at what level of quality of existence. It determines the relative power of society to resist and repair the damage done by natural and other catastrophes. It is also a power of the individual, as a level of the individual's scientific knowledge and technology of practice illustrates this point. Within that arrangement of individual and society, the following fact is singular. The contribution of a valid fundamental scientific discovery of an individual mind benefits not only all of present and future generations of mankind, but the dead of past generations too. So, in this way too, the dead need never die. The contribution of such a single, valid, fundamental discovery by the individual is a universal act. By means of such an act, the single individual is acting directly upon the society as a whole. This act transforms the character of the entire society in a non-linear way. The person, as individual, is acting upon the society also as a conceptually indivisible individuality in a direct way. This elementary conception requires careful elaboration.
Okay. Do do people get the, or are people generally familiar with the idea of Adam Smith and the Adam Smith idea of self-interest that is very different, that he's sort of taking a few shots at, that's different from his definition of self-interest that we're reading right now? Eureka, are you familiar, Eureka, with Adam Smith a little bit? Oh, I can't hear you. You're on mute. Oh, you're a little choppy. Eureka. Yeah, can you speak?
Trying to unmute.
Yes, better.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
No, I'm not familiar. Matt, can you give me a little bit of details about?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, your mic is a little bit choppy, but no, for anybody who's not familiar, basically the part of Adam Smith is a character that LaRouche is really taking aim at because he's so influential, and he was a thinker whose ideas largely shaped the philosophy of free trade, which is also the underpinnings of today's modern globalization, which he enumerated in his 1776 book, Wealth of Nations. I don't want to say too much about this, but this was basically something which was used by the British East India Company in order to justify the empire. And what they would do is they would tell the Americans or the Indians or any other country that they wanted to enslave that according to the law of Adam Smith, this great genius, kind of like the Isaac Newton of economics, money has value because people want it. And he builds a whole construct around a certain idea of mankind that he defines early on as being a creature which is defined by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. And we express those desires of wanting pleasure and avoiding pain in the form of the markets, because that's what shows you the price of things, what we're willing to spend for things. And that doesn't have any moral differentiation between, you know, let's say oil or whether you want to buy tractors in a society or whether you want to buy opium. It's all worth money, and all money is equal. So that was used generally to justify the empire's casting of its net upon its victims. And one of the precepts of this, or one of the things that follows, is that when governments intervene in the economy, it unnaturally disrupts the natural expression of human desires for pleasure. So that's bad. But he says you should have no protectionism, no government intervention, just have everybody pursue their own thing and pursue their own self-interest, which is really what everybody wants, is their own self-interest. And things will just magically organize itself in the form of what he called the invisible hand. The invisible hand will bring order to the chaos. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. It'll just happen. So the idea of self-interest is really a selfish idea. It's a mystical idea, and it's one that really presumes that human beings are not a creature of mental activity, of reason, that can plan the future teleologically and carry out their behavior according to a future state of existence. That's not what Adam Smith allows for human nature. It's purely an animal-like creature that's purely defined by sensual gratification and avoiding pain. So that's very different from what LaRouche is describing here, is this higher quality of reality that every human being is endowed with by virtue of this reason that we can develop, and that ties us into the future and the past, right? In a variety of degrees. We don't all have to be Max Planck's, but we can all tap into this power and transmit ideas that go beyond our lives. So I think that would just be what, and always relating that back to potential population density, because we're always getting at how do we formulate a science of physical economy? That's always a question to keep in mind, right? So potential population density. I think, has everyone watched the Power of Labor video by now? Cody, have you seen the 1984 Power of Labor video? Okay, gotta watch that. God, it's absolutely, the amount of payback for the 2 hours of investment you put into that, it's a lifetime. You'll love it. So I don't know, Quan, Jerry, Luca, Cody, did I leave anything out about Adam Smith or anything? Or would you guys add anything to that?
Well, maybe about the word isochronicity.
Please.
I don't know, but I have a hunch that one possible synonym for this isochronicity as understood by LaRouche would be timelessness. Because the person is linked to his present society. That's a common sense thing in the first sense of common sense. But the fact that or maybe the word for the word from Plato that would be equivalent to isochronicity in this case would be participation to the universe. That's why being linked to the present society, that creative person is also linked to past society and future society. And a very down-to-earth example for when he said in a former paragraph that the dead need not to be dead. If you improve the archaeological techniques, for example, you can recreate societies of the past in a very detailed manner. So in a certain sense, they are not dead because they can be restored for us in details.
That's good. Yeah. I think it's an important idea. And additionally, for those societies who maybe can't be restored because, things have been lost to the sands of time, the reality of the ideas that were discovered by the individuals living within those societies still, despite maybe the material non-existence of that society, still permeates and will continue to permeate throughout human existence, right?
And sometimes in a very physical way. For example, the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and related to the documentary by Krasniqi, showing that that Great Pyramid of Egypt is the embodiment of all the mathematical constants still ruling the universe.
Which, by the way, that was a little plug that Quan made for a documentary that he discovered a little while ago. An incredible documentary. The most I've seen hundreds of hours of stuff on the pyramids and different hypotheses of how these things were built, especially the Great Pyramid. Nothing compares in rigor and reasonability to what is laid out in this documentary. And it's on our Rising Tide site. I'll email it out actually, so you guys have it in your inbox. It's completely worth watching. It's really good. Cool. Very good. So we shall proceed to chapter, what is it, 12? 12, the individual and society. Who would like to pick up the reading here? Luke, go for it. But Luke, keep in mind, you're on mute.
I knew that. Society can and must be conceived as an indivisible individuality. Most simply, the addition or subtraction of any ration of individual persons does not alter the most essential feature, quality of a society. That it exists as a society, that it exists only as it is brought into existence as a society, and is perpetuated as a society. With this, we associate certain functional ideas which are unique to the notion of society as indivisible in this sense. So the indivisible individual person is to be seen functionally as interacting with nothing other than that notion of the whole society as a functional indivisibility. It is the leading implications of that functional relationship which now occupy the center of our attention. Although only in first approximation, we have now identified, in principle, the solution to the Parmenides paradox. What we have considered and are about to consider should be read against the background of Nicholas of Cusa's Deducta Ignorantia, where, the same principled solution is employed extensively and with an essential relevance. This should be considered also against the background of our own review of the Riemann and proposed Riemann-Beltrami forms of continuous representation of a nonlinear negentropic surface function. With respect to that concept of society as an indivisible continuous process, the individual person within the society is a true singularity, topologically. This singularity's existence destroys the continuity, connectivity of the process, at least in the formalist's view of topology. This damage is repaired by human creative activity, as we have defined that in broad terms. For example, the act of effecting and imparting a valid fundamental scientific discovery establishes a perfect, pervasive, efficient connection to the society as an indivisible process. This repairs the damage and accomplishes that result in a manner depicted by the Riemann surface function, or more adequately, by the required Riemann-Beltrami surface function. Those two preceding paragraphs may be read also as a statement of the Parmenides paradox and its solution. This action we have described has the effect of increasing the potential population density of the society as an indivisible whole. Take not only the transformation of A towards B, but also the transformation or the subsequent transformation of B towards C, and then C towards D, and then D towards E, as corresponding to the transformation of A towards B, in the sense we have described successful survival. In that sense, the function for the individual discoverer, transformation 0, A0 towards B1, intersects the transformation of transformation 0 alpha or A0 towards B2, where B1 is the new momentary state of the individual, and B2 the effect of the same act of transformation by that individual upon the society.
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one, admittedly. I have a few thoughts before we go on. Does anybody have a question or a thought that they'd like to formulate before I say something that might or might not be how LaRouche is thinking right now? Or Quan, do you actually have, or Jared, do you have a thought about how to conceptualize this process? If not, that's okay.
Well, what's a T0?
That was what I was wondering. Because we hadn't really encountered, I don't think, the T0 before. Or am I wrong? I don't think we have.
Yes, but I think here we have to take the T as the creative mental action, because if you remember in chapter 10 or 9, the idea of the singularity or the discontinuity precisely is used also to describe the creative mental action. Mm-hmm. And because of this, I don't know if you remember step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and it's step 2 that has the name of creative mental action, and the other step 1, 3, and 4 was speaking of increase in relative population density or progress in science and technology. So that T is at the center, if you want, between progress in science and technology and increase in population potential population density.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about it because one of the things he says here that like when you're, how does he word it? I'm just reading through it again. In dealing with successful survival, right, which he compared earlier in contrast to momentary survival. Think of momentary survival as like giving somebody a fish, right, just to feed them and stop them from surviving, which they would have died if they didn't get that fish. Whereas teaching them to fish, so that's giving them a fish is momentary survival. Teaching them to fish, giving them the power and the skill set to do it themselves is of the successful survival. So you're training the person. Think of a good teacher versus a teacher that just wants the kid to memorize something to pass a test. That kid who just memorizes doesn't have a power to do things for themselves. They're not more sovereign. If anything, they're less sovereign. So they're, you know, whenever you have that quality of a creative new power that has been attained, then in that one state of transformation of A to B, that power will express itself in future transformations that you build upon in the course of improvements of future states of D to E or E to F. So there's something that's common that's not changing even amongst all of the states of change and transformation. He's always like looking, well, where is the constant? What is, right? What is that? Which is what Kwan just got at again in his remarks just now.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you noticed that, but LaRouche write a little bit like Plato, because Plato has the tendency to explain something in paragraph 3, for example, and he will repeat the same explanation but with different words in paragraph 7, and he will do it again in paragraph 10, and so on.
Yeah, no, it's very similar in form. Yeah. Yeah, it's a constructive, it's like he's talking about constructive geometry as being a superior quality of thinking of geometry than simply deductive descriptive geometry. It's two different universes. And the most superior one is the constructive one, where you're not starting with assumptions and building on it on blind assumptions, but you're starting with discoveries, right? What is and that's where in previous chapters we were talking about the only self-evident thing that we will assume is that a circle has no self-evident existence. It's the effect of circular action, right? It's the shadow of an action. It's not a thing that you can define in a static, crystallized way. And then from there, you can build on, well, you can define an entire space-time, a whole science and language around discoveries instead of just blind assumptions that there are these self-evident circles made up of infinite points which have these definitions of having no space width or breadth, which essentially don't exist, right? So you're saying that existences like circles and squares and everything else, they are made up of these infinite nothings that you just add together that make lines and make surface areas and make volumes. It's kind of, somewhat self-contradictory, whereas LaRouche is saying, no, build things through a constructive geometric approach instead, through your mind. And that's sort of what he does in his compositions as well. He's building a sort of foundation for the mind to hold on to and add to. But he has to continuously repeat because we forget as well, and also things take on different meanings as you say something new. What you had formerly said now changes its meaning. So there, yeah, you will find something similar in Plato too. Yes.
Yes.
Cool.
For example, you know that at the time of Alexandria, 2000 years ago, they already invented the steam machine, for example. Okay, and that would be a B1. Okay, but for social reason, that B1 was not capable to expand to everybody at the time of Greek Alexandria, for example. And it took almost 20 centuries later to express itself in England to become B2. So the perfect society would be the society that would permit the expression from B1 to B2 in one generation rather than to wait 18 or 20 centuries.
Yeah, well said. Very well said.
Yeah, I think he defines B1 being the new momentary state of the individual.
Exact.
And B2, the effect of the same act of transformation by that individual upon the society.
Right.
So once it's completely communicated, I see it as a discovery is made, and then once the discovery is fully assimilated by society, you have the B1 from the individual, and then the B2 where everyone in society or society is transformed, I guess. I don't know if it makes any sense to you. Like
absolutely, absolutely, or at least benefit from that.
Yeah. Like once people ride the planes, not everybody invented a plane or trains.
Exactly. And what you said, that the society would be transformed by B1, it would be even a higher stage, because most of the people would benefit from the invention, which is already not bad. But what you said would be transformed by B1, that B1 would have such an influence that it would uplift the level of awareness and of knowledge of most of the people.
Good. Yeah.
So I will keep reading.
Jawohl.
So the creative mental processes of the individual are acting upon or acting directly upon the functional state of the society as a whole as a transformation of A to B. Is this the individual particular, the singularity, acting directly, efficiently upon the whole, to the effect of changing that whole? Is it rather, as some formalists would argue, a mediated connection? If I project a laser's pulse through a medium, is the impact upon the selected target then a relationship mediated by the medium? The guidelines for use of lasers in the United States Strategic Defense Initiative, for example, prescribe that the laser pulse shot at the incoming Soviet weapon from the Earth's surface must have the minimal interaction with the medium, e.g. the atmosphere. This policy may be served in either or both of two most notable ways. One may decrease the amount of atmosphere between the laser and the target, or one may tune the laser pulse to bypass the frequency channels of interaction of the atmosphere. There are other notable tactics, but these indicated suffice to illustrate the point at hand.
Keep in mind, he was writing this in, I think, 1989, 1990, different geopolitical environment that he's speaking in right there. And I'll send a little video, 20-minute video on the SDI that's referenced, so people have some context to that.
But, I mean, it's still, he's talking about the mediated connection and the formalists, and that reference for me is not really clear.
Well, I think he's drawing sort of a parallel and an analogy to some of the concepts that he's developing on human economy and what a human being is and how we relate to the whole, and thinking about that. Just he's sort of using a device, I think, to think about how does the idea express itself? What does it transmit through into the system as a whole that it's changing, causing to change? And then he's looking, I think he's drawing a parallel in some ways to lasers in space shooting down rockets that have to move through the medium of the atmosphere, and how you could either have them to adapt to the atmosphere that they're moving through, or tune them in such a way that they're not affected by the atmospheric disturbances that they're going to move through. This is obviously not exactly the same thing that we're seeing with human beings, but it's something he's drawing upon him. Maybe he'll say more about it.
Another useful analogy is the method for effecting thermonuclear fusion of, for example, small cannonball pellets of tritium and deuteride to maximize isentropic compression in the manner implicit for plasma physics in Bernard Riemann's 1859 on the propagation of plane air waves of finite magnitude. To cause the singularity, the relatively small particular, to exert the maximal impact upon the process as a unity, tune the action harmonically to follow the isochronic pathway of physical least action. Merely note what is said explicitly. Catch another implication out of the corner of your eye, and then bring your concentration fully to bear upon the latter implication. Is it necessarily the case that action transmitted by way of an interposing medium is a mediated relationship? Merely a mediated relationship? That is the point immediately at issue. The idea associated with individuals' transformation 0 of A0 to B1 has the relatively universal effect of transformation 0 A0 to B1.
To B2, I think.
It says B1 in this image that we're using.
But it's 2, I think.
I think he meant it might be a typo. Yeah, it might be a typo. It is.
It would make more sense.
Yeah.
Maybe. So is the transformation of that idea to become the efficiently increased potential population density of the society a mediation in the sense statistical gas theories, for example, might desire?
Oh, here, I just had a thought. It just occurred to me that he is dealing with and refuting those who believe that you can map out society scientifically using a thermodynamic system as your model, which is what's popularly designed today. If you look at the Great Reset crowd of Klaus Schwab, you look at all of these guys, they are using a thermodynamic closed system, presuming certain functions like entropy are dominant in their system when they are talking about what the human species and the human economy should be. So this is where a lot of the depopulation discussion comes in, the idea of overpopulation, because there's not enough energy in the system to sustain the population at its current living standards, right? So he's talking to and refuting that entire movement, which is a very strong and powerful movement, even in his day. It's become more dominant even today, 30 years later. And saying that, yeah, you're right. You do have to look at hydrodynamic and plasma dynamic systems. Or thermodynamic systems, that does help you conceptually to understand what a human economy is. You're correct, but you're incorrect in a lot of your other presumptions that this is not a closed system, that this is not, it's not something that's mechanical as such. There's phenomenon operating in the human system, which are transcendent of the mechanical processes. And when you look at why we're not making breakthroughs in fusion or a lot of the other domains of science, is because we're trying to define them in these mechanical ways that leave out what's even happening in that domain where creative thought is not the source of change in a plasma torus or something like that, right? Or in any plasma. It's not human thought, but it's still something more than the sum of the parts that are animating it. So he, again, keep that in mind. He's having this dialogue with people who think that way.
Think of a great tidal wave borne across most of the expanse of the Pacific. Assume a seismic disturbance near the Andes to send such an effect to some island of the Asiatic rim. Is the latter effect to be described meaningfully as a mediated effect? In a hydrodynamics conceived from the viewpoint of a constructive non-Euclidean geometry, it is not a mediated effect, but a direct one, e.g. retarded potential of propagation of effect. More emphatically, once we focus directly upon the role of isochronicity in defining the principle of physical least action and the nature of all valid representation of elementary physical law, the relationship is not a mediated one. Unmediated, negentropic transformation of society by the singular individual person's sovereign, creative mental powers is possible in terms of the functions implicit in transformation of A to B. This is the only means by which the negentropic transformation may be effected. The existence of the sovereign, singular, creative mental processes of the individual person is not merely a source of such advantage to society. It is the only source of that advantage, an advantage upon which the continued successful survival of society depends absolutely. Any society in history which has abandoned the commitment to fostering scientific and technological progress has suffered some or all of these consequences. 1. The society has been taken over by a native or foreign usurping power. 2. The society has collapsed into a dark age, as early 14th Europe did. Or 3. The society has become extinct, or virtually so. Suppression of scientific and technological progress by suppressing the singular natural distinction of human nature eradicates from practice that which sets society above the troops of baboons and tends so to transform the society's population to become that of a barbarous, brutish collection of yahoos. It is shown in the science of physical economy that any fixed mode of production depletes marginally the improved natural resources upon which that mode depends. This marginal depletion is overcome solely by means of technological progress. Those means center most visibly around the density of consumption of usable energy, as this is a measurable threefoldly: A per capita, B per hectare, C per angstrom unit or micron of application to working area of production. The possibility of generating and assimilating efficiently such increases of energy flux density is constrained by the rate of advance of level of technological progress. So it's constrained by the rate of advance of level of technological progress. So in the latter account, a zero technological growth society is an entropic economic process, a dying culture, a people which has lost its moral fitness to survive. Hence, the value of the singular individual person is located uniquely in that which sets that person and all mankind apart from and above each and all species of beast. The existence of society depends uniquely upon this value. That is the value of self. That defines true self-interest, to preserve and enhance one's true value. That defines what one requires be fulfilled as needs of personal self-interest. I transform and do this singularly. Therefore, I exist, were a rebuke to Descartes. I transform and do this singularly. Therefore, I exist. My value were measured by the practical consequences of my present existence for the present, future, and past generations, each and all considered as an indivisible whole, were the proper rebuke to the immoral irrationalist Adam Smith. It is now time to turn to the matter of present, future, and past, considered as an indivisible unit. As to the present society, it depends upon our singular function for its quality, its potential for successful survival. As to the future society, however far it advances above the level of the present, our singular contribution remains actively embedded in the foundations of that future, more advanced state. In the foundations of that future, more advanced state. As to the future society,
As to the past generations, then?
was that? No, I didn't read that far. Did I?
Maybe we have a different version digitally because you're using the book, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so keep reading.
As to the past generations, by acting upon the singular contributions of each, directly or even only indirectly, we enrich those with our own singular contribution. So do we bridge the gulfs of time to establish so a direct form of transition with persons. Sorry?
It's transaction.
Transaction?
Mhm.
What did I say?
Transition.
Oh. So do we bridge to a direct form of transaction with persons from the most distant places in the remotest corners of mankind's past and future time. As the relationship exists, so is all humanity presented to us as an indivisible singularity of our universe. The expanse of past through future time, which is the span of mankind's existence, does not render mankind divisible into periods of time. As I am in direct relationship to my remotest ancestor and your remotest posterity at once, the image of absolute time dissolves, replaced by the appropriate notion of relativity in physical space-time. Similarly, all mankind's relationship to the universe as a whole, mankind's efficient negentropic existence as a singularity of that negentropic universe. Similarly, all mankind's relationship to the universe as a whole. So that's similar, okay. So in our mind, can we approximate the Creator's view of his universe and so inform our minds better to his work in that universe? In our singular, almost timeless relationship to the entirety of our universe, through the means of our creative mental powers' singular negentropic relationship to all of past, present, and future mankind, we should see the meaning of universal physical law and the characteristic isochronicity of physical law properly represented. In the last highest or next to highest view attainable by mortal minds, the extent of physical space-time becomes as if a timeless, indivisible single entity with which all of mankind's existence is a singularity, and each of us singularity in indivisible physical space-time, because each of us is a singularity within the existence of mankind. Hello, Socrates. Let us now act in concert to save mankind from the peril of AD 1992. That is a practical proposition, if we but understand the means by which that is rendered efficiently true.
Yeah, I was reminded in the Phaedo dialogue, the one where Socrates ends up dying, or at least the mortal part of him. There's an example that's brought up of Socrates describing how he was seeking causality as a young man and reading all these different philosophers. And then he finally encountered Anaxagoras, who he said, finally, somebody's talking about the mind. Finally, I thought I had an answer and a proper technique, because they were including mind and everybody else was just trying to find it in mechanisms. But then I found that it was just a word he was using. Anaxagoras himself wasn't actually going to look at intentions for the causality of why things happen. It was just sort of another mechanism there. And he gave the example of, I think he like moved his body, right? He moved his hand or his arm, and he's like, if somebody were to ask me, or if I were to ask them why I moved my arm the way I did, they would say, oh, it's because you flexed your muscles. And why'd you flex your muscles? Because your bone moved the way it did. And why is that? Oh, it's because and they would always find like some physical reason, and they would just lazily stop short. And he's like, but I wanted a real reason. Ultimately is my intention. I'm trying to make a point. And Socrates moved his arm to make a point. That was my intention, to communicate to you, and that's satisfying. But these other philosophers wouldn't go there. And even today, that's a problem that we have. People say, oh, you can't really know causality because when you have a thought, that thought occurs in the brain in space and time, and then it causes these electromagnetic signals to move through your body into action to cause something to occur. And that's all separated by time, which you can always break down. And I've actually seen on YouTube different scientists giving a TED Talk speech saying that that's why you can't know causality, because it's separated in space and time. And because it's infinitely divisible between effect and cause, you can't ever know, you can't move through all the infinite steps to cause from effect. So there is no cause. It's not knowable. Go to sleep. It's actually a popular thing. Whereas LaRouche is saying, no, Socrates' thoughts are having direct, immediate effect as a causal agent on all of history before Socrates and afterwards. And as we are too, the more we think and situate our identities in those terms, the more we can access greater powers of thought we have within ourselves as well. And to the degree that we don't, and we adapt to our physical world, and we just make our identities, based on pleasure and pain or survival, we lose access to those inherent powers that we would otherwise have access to. So that's also something worth thinking about.
Hey, Matt, let me ask you a question.
Mm.
So when he says at the end, hello, Socrates, what do you think LaRouche is intending to communicate by that?
I think he's just saying that Socrates is still alive, and he's directly interfacing with Socrates in the sense of the mind of Socrates. Yeah, like Socrates' identity and his thoughts are still as alive today as they ever were.
So he's in communion with Socrates when he's saying this.
Yeah, it's not like a Ouija board or anything. It's just like, yeah. Yeah.
So he's saying, I'm going to work with you, Socrates, right now, and we're going to change society, or we're going to save civilization here.
Yeah, and you know, we're going to read next week. We'll start reading an essay by Max Planck, and we're going to find the same quality of identity in Max Planck as well, in his philosophy that he attributes to his own creative thought, and other scientists we're going to look at as well in their minds, and we're going to find the same thing occurring as we're seeing expressed in LaRouche's own way there.
Because like, who's he quoting?
And right at the end,
Yeah.
himself. That's just, he's being playful. He's being cheeky.
Yeah, but why would he need to quote himself?
Don't worry about that, man. He's having fun.
I know, but I mean, it's interesting. There might be a reason for it. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, let me know if
Well,
you find out. I don't know.
well, another explanation is when he say hello Socrates, he was not speaking to the historical Socrates, but to each of us as a potential person that would have that level of awareness.
Good point.
Yeah, because it's all one. The whole time, you can't separate time. It's all one.
Yes. Yes, well, yes. And once again, I like to bring some rapprochement with Asian thinking. But in Buddhism, there is a sutra called the Avatamsakta Sutra, which is the sutra of the garland of flower. And the universe is perceived as an immense net formed by diamonds which are related to each others, okay? And if you imagine each diamond as a singularity, it resembles very much to what is presented here.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Quan, you want to read the last section?
Yes, why not? Once again, I think that I should not have chopped audio, but stop me if you think if you have that problem. Okay, starting. Okay, chapter 13, agape. Those among us who are habituated to creative mental life are situated to observe some curious, provocative, and most pleasing aesthetical congruences among scientific discovery, classical music, and other matters. Love of God, love of mankind, love of truth, and love of classical beauty partake of a single imperial quality of joyfulness called agape in the New Testament's original Greek, caritas in the Latin translation, and therefore charity in the King James 1 Corinthians 13. This emotional quality, agape, may be addressed as emotion by aid of reference to several types of relevant experiences. It is known as the tears of joy evoked by witnessing a child's happy discovery of the rational solution to a problem of construction. It is the warm glow experienced, the sense of a light turning on in one's head as a valid discovery is made in science, in music, in classical plastic art forms, and so on. It is the joy of love toward the deceased, as this is captured in the valid performance of Mozart's Requiem, Mozart 1756 to 1791. It is the emotion associated with a conscious practice, congruent in guiding conception with the view of self, mankind, and universe outlined in summary just above. For the classical cultures of Plato's Athens, aesthetical beauty was inseparable from congruence with the harmonic orderings subtended by the golden section. This was the role of aesthetics applied explicitly to the plastic fine arts and to the well-tempered musical polyphony as it was known in Plato's lifetime. Today, we know much more than did Plato, but that enables us to admire Plato's work the more adequately. Simply, the harmonic orderings congruent with the golden section are beautiful because they express life in opposition to death. Any artistic composition not congruent with that harmony is ugliness and thus no true art. Life expresses and portrays negantropy. Life as negantropy expresses the referent for the verb to create. Kant, in his last critique, the Critique of Judgment, restated his argument that creative processes are not comprehensible. In the same location, Kant argues, from the same premises, that there exists no rational yardstick of artistic beauty, and that, therefore, no yardstick exists excepting an irrationalist, pragmatic one. Although Franco-Swiss varieties of 18th century Romanticism were premised upon the Oedipo irrationalism of the correspondence of Voltaire, 1694 to 1778, the spread of Rousseau's 1712 to 1778, moral degeneracy into Germany as 19th century Romanticism was made possible by the influence of Kant's axiomatically irrationalist dogma of aesthetics. On this account, the anti-romantic poet Heinrich Heine, 1799 to 1856, denounced the evil Madame de Staël and Kant with surgical precision of insight. The so-called neo-Kantians unleashed in Germany both to defend the radical irrationalism of positivism and to corrupt and destroy the morals of Bismarck's Germany, are of special historical relevance to our practical concerns here. So we have a portrait of Voltaire. After that, we have a portrait of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Today, wherever the dogmatic irrationalisms of Francis Bacon, David Hume, 1711 to 1776, Voltaire, Rousseau, Kant, and the positivist prevails, the absurd aesthetical dogma of art by the artist for art's sake prevails. The fanatical irrationalists of art insist, because they have been brainwashed to do so, that Kepler is irrelevant to musical tuning because, as Savigny decreed, there is an unbridgeable gulf between Naturwissenschaft and Geistwissenschaft. The dogma that scientific reason must be barred from the axiomatically irrationalist domain of professional artistic opinion. see Appendix 10, that romantic psychosis has reigned side by side with Helmholtz and Ellis in the musical and plastic arts curricula of most of this century. So in music, cacophony and ugliness for the sake of evil ugliness prevail, driving bel canto and the classical heritage into shrinking, exile places of refuge.
And I guess it was Kant, right, who was the first to, or not the first, but he famously put forth the idea that beauty is simply in the eye of the beholder, and that there are no objective criteria for reasonably talking about beauty in any way
Yes,
that's not, right?
exactly. And because it's derived directly from his main opinion in La Critique de la Raison Pratique, that you need to be moral because it is your duty to be moral. So there's no way to have a pathway to morality through reason. And automatically it would apply to beauty, to architecture, to music, etc.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's where the division between Nature-Wissenschaft and Geisteswissenschaft comes in, the science of nature and the science of the soul, that there's this absolute gulf and bridge. And if you assume that that exists, then all sorts of poison will seep through both in the arts and in the sciences.
Exactly. It was the beginning of what I call, once again, the postmodernist play, even if at Kant times it was not yet postmodernist, of course. Okay, continuing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, the relevant point being stressed here in this way is that the appreciation of the quality of agape in great classical art is dependent upon the artistic expression of two interdependent qualities of composition. First, all classical artistic compositions are demonstrated throughout by physical space-time congruence with golden section harmonics. Any work which departs from that rule is not classical, is arbitrary, irrationalist, and ugly, to exactly the degree such violation occurs. Second, mere congruence with golden section harmonies is not sufficient. That congruence defines only the rules which must be satisfied by draughtsmanship. It is not art unless the composition is subsumed by an artistic idea of the same quality as a mentally creative, valid, fundamental scientific discovery. A dead human form at the moment of death has, like the human skeleton, the harmonic organization supplied to it by life. It is not alive as a harmonically sound plastic or musical composition is not art, but only students exercise in roles of draftsmanship, unless the spark of creative genius is embedded in the harmonies. Thus, in classical art, the composer is prohibited from exercising what anarchists generally, including such irrationalists as the Romantics and overly satanic modernists, regard as individual artistic freedom. There is no freedom permitted in the composition of classical art, but true human freedom, valid creative discovery, as the highest practice of physical science, sets a standard for this. Thus, as to artistic emotion, the true classical artistic emotion is the state which is evoked by excitation of the faculty associated with the transformation A onward B. It is evoked by moments of generating, transmitting, and efficiently assimilating valid fundamental scientific discoveries. This evoked emotion is the power of sustained, protracted concentration we require for such mental activity. It is the emotion, such as tears of joy, evoked by fixing upon that singular human quality we should love in all other persons. It is therefore the emotion of love of truth and of classical beauty. We humans require scientific and technological progress as the continuing ruling impulse in the policy shaping of society. Without it, successful survival is impossible to attain. We require it to sustain human life. But the question arises, why should human life be sustained? Why should the Creator assure that it exists and be sustained? By sustaining life through scientific and technological progress, we require society and its members to cultivate those mental, creative potentialities by means of which society sustain a stream of generation, transmission, and efficient assimilation of successive ways of such revolutionary progress. To foster that activity, we must motivate that activity as the apparently spontaneous, characteristic response disposition of many individual members of the society. In other words, the society requires an on-site way of life congruent with this task. Culture is the best definition of the term. That culture has the effect of cultivating the individual and society in the mode most consistent with the distinction of being human, and in the exercise and development of that quality to create, which is in the image of the Creator. The universe has no need of a human species whose practice does not express, foremost, that creative mental activity which sets man absolutely apart from and absolutely above each and all species and varieties of beasts. Should societies practice disregard that conditionality of our species' existence, we risk producing the circumstances, as we are tending to do today, under which the laws of the universe will act lawfully, virtually to obliterate a human species which has rendered itself as immoral and useless to creation, as Malthusianism has caused the United States of America to become during the recent 20-odd years. This choice of disposition between commitment to Malthusianism and to promotion of scientific and technological progress corresponds to a policy shaping disposition, the quality of impulse, which regulates the way in which we formulate policy initiatives successively, in response to changing circumstances. Thus, such a policy shaping disposition corresponds to the determination of successful survival. In contrast, a successful choice of particular policy of the moment represent momentary survival. Obviously, a policy disposition corresponding to successful survival is only a general way of expressing an efficient commitment to fostering a negentropic increase of potential population density. This generality subsumes varying degrees of that general quality. Conversely, entropic policy dispositions vary in degree. Although we have put the emphasis upon physical economy as such, we have indicated, perhaps adequate for our purpose, that by a commitment to a negentropic policy shaping disposition, we mean to imply the control correlatives we have indicated here as cohering with the singular creative mental act of non-linear transformation. That latter as the means of increasing potential population density through the generation, the transmission, and the efficient assimilation of scientific and technological progress. Once we have begun the permanent colonization of Mars on a sound basis, as we might approximately 40 years from now, the philosophical standpoint in statecraft, which has been reflected here, would be hegemonic for humanity. Once we commit ourselves to becoming man in the universe, there is a great and good change in our way of viewing ourselves. Today, the problem is to reach the point when the policy disposition I have described here will be recognized as the only true common sense. End of chapter.
We made it.
End of book.
End of book.
Yeah, end of book.
So any thoughts or questions regarding what we just went through with that last set of bombshell ideas?
So he finishes with agape.
He finishes with agape. Yeah. Yeah, went through a lot of science and philosophy in the previous chapters, and then he ends with this quality of agape for the last chapter, and that's right.
Les premiers seront les derniers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think it's not a surprise that he ends with agape, because after all, agape is the engine for the singularity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the motive, the thing that causes it really to light on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that this idea is as well of the importance geopolitically of space being more than people realize is really big, because this whole century, the whole 20th century, the degree of effort that was put into sabotaging mankind's natural next phase of evolution into becoming a spacefaring species has been extraordinary. Like the oligarchy has put so much energy into subversions on every level of teaching of science, practical application of technology, direction of investments, in towards, away from breakthroughs in space tech towards windmills and solar panels, all with the purpose of keeping us in a cage. Because I think the oligarchy trying to keep control of the system is aware that as soon as we make our policy commitments and identities associated with the infinite, which is, as far as we know, the universe is infinite, it forces a total paradigm shift of how we're thinking about everything else.
Yeah. And maybe I would like to make a literary comment. I don't know if you guys read the series of science fiction books called Dune by Frank Herbert.
Saw the movie a long time ago.
Yes, but the movie, what I know that's very cliche what I would say, but the movie doesn't reflect at all the series of novel. Okay,
Okay.
but did you the six books of the novel, the six book by Frank Herbert and not the ones by his son? Okay, because I want to say that that science fiction book by Frank Herbert is a kind of equivalent in fiction to the word by LaRouche, if you are willing to believe me.
Really? Okay, all
Yeah,
right. I'll have to. That's a big statement. I'll have to definitely read those.
yeah. Because if you give me 2 minutes to make
Hey, go for it. Go for it.
okay, because the universe of Dune, okay, started when the human beings decided to destroy the computers and the machine and the superior kind of artificial intelligence. Okay, because those okay, first it would for Herbert, if you read all the series and you make some calculation, it would happen in 25,000 years. Okay, so it's in very far away future. So mankind would reach to a certain level of technological development that the robots, the advanced artificial intelligence would take control of our species, okay? And after a war that they call the Butlerian War, according to a character Butler, that would destroy all the robots and that they wouldn't develop their psychological capabilities. However, it's still a society ruled by a feudal rules, so it resembles to a big oligarchy, okay? And one of the member of that oligarchy, by a trick that is not interesting to know, but we managed to live almost 4,000 years. And that guy is called the God Emperor of Dune, okay? And that God Emperor of Dune, and that is the nexus of the novel, is a kind of a future Christ, if you want, okay? That is at the same time the king philosopher, if you want, okay, that will use tyranny because he would be called a tyrant, but he would use his tyranny to force the human beings to develop their agape, even if Frank Herbert did not use the specific word agape in his novel. But that tyrant, paradoxically, would force mankind to develop the agape and to expand the entire universe. So I stop here because I gave in a nutshell what I think to be the core of the novel.
Well, that's very provocative, but and maybe one really just has to read it to fully appreciate what you're saying, because could you really force agape, or rather than
No,
inspire it, or does he inspire it and you're just using the word force?
well, he forced it and he inspired it because he was a tyrant after all. Because he he he, he was in interaction with a much degenerate mankind. So he had to torture them a little bit, to force them a little bit, to make the best of mankind to appear.
Gotta read the book, I think. Yeah. Right now. Okay, I gotta read. Yeah, all right.
Okay, so don't forget, it's 6 tomes, it's 6 books. Okay, if you don't want to read the 6, read at least the Emperor God of Dune, which is the number 3 or the number 4.
Okay. All right. Okay, I will. Well, definitely the role of art is key in all of this. And do you think that Frank Herbert had a love of humanity in his heart when he was writing? Do you think that agapic quality was
Oh
animating?
yeah, yes. I would say that he was a a true lover of mankind, but at the same time, he was capable to see our potentiality to degenerate and our potentiality to elevate ourselves. So I think that he was a man of awareness, and he was capable to introduce, uh, maybe it's my Asian side that is flatter here, but I have to admit that he was capable to introduce many Buddhist notions
Mm.
in a very subtle way. And if you read in details his books, it was a man of high culture, that's for sure. And high culture is not only the amount of things that you know, but the level of awareness that you accomplished.
Mm-hmm. True. Well, I think, yeah, what I'll do, I'll send a good recording out to people as well of Mozart's Requiem, since that was referenced in this chapter, and I think it does exemplify the quality of agape in music in a really really beautiful way, which is also tied to a sense of mortality and immortality as well. It's really, if you haven't listened to it, it's really worth listening to. And yeah, next week what we'll do is read the first of, it'll be 4 readings that we'll start, of an essay, like I said, by Planck from 1935 called The Philosophy of Physics. And Planck was writing this at a time, and keep in mind, Planck as well situated his scientific discoveries in his artistic identity as a pianist, and he was a concert pianist. He'd even performed with Mozart, with Einstein at the violin, and they would perform Mozart together, and they would both attribute the power of that passion that they acquired in their playing together to their ability to overcome the mathematical blocks that they were encountering in their science. So these nonlinear creative leaps that are beyond the deductive inductive realm that LaRouche has been talking about, Planck exemplified it really wonderfully. So he's writing this at a time in 1935 when Germany, and he's in Germany, is going fascist. There's an attack on the culture, right? A lot of the greatest traditions of German culture that gave birth to the best advances of science and arts are under attack. And we have, like, instead of Schiller and the von Humboldt school, we have instead Nietzsche and Wagner, who are being promoted by a lot of these same fascist elements and supporters that were allied with bankers on Wall Street in the city of London. So these were figures who continue to play a large influence in today's world, in today's cultural matrix that we all live in. So Max Planck wrote this as a way to really intervene on that, and he created what I find is just the most immortal work that I've ever read of him, for all readers of all times. And like I said, he breaks it up into 4 sections, and each section we should be able to get through with each reading. So I think it'll be good for the spirit, and it'll put more meat on the bones on the unification of artistic and scientific thought in a great mind. So that's what we'll start next Wednesday.
Cool.
And I'll email that out to everybody as well.
And then Tagore after that?
And then maybe Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, perhaps, but that's a maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay. Matt, just a personal question.
Yeah.
Did you receive my answer on your personal telegram?
On what? Wait, what?
You sent me a question today or yesterday, and I sent you an answer to your personal telegram account. I don't know if you got it.
No, oh yes. I got that on Jeff Brown.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Awesome.
just to be sure.
Yes, received it.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, Jeff Brown did a good interview with Pepe Escobar. I'm halfway through it, that he just released. And
okay, cool.
Cynthia and I will be interviewing Jeff Brown on Saturday, so look out for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. All right, guys. And yeah, if anybody wants to be on our Telegram group, if you're not, I'm talking basically to you, Eureka and Cody. If you guys want to be on the Telegram group, send me your info for Telegram, either your number or whatever username you have, and I'll put you on. It's like a bulletin board, or chat group.
What's the name of the chat group?
Political Developments and Rising Tide Study Group. Are you not on it?
Yeah, it's just sometimes you forget the name of these things.
Oh, yeah. That's it. I got to make a channel. I heard somewhere that you can make a channel, kind of like social media or whatever, for Rising Tide Foundation or Canadian Patriot on Telegram. I didn't look into it, but I got to figure that out.
Oh, yours is a group.
It's a group. Yeah, I got to make a channel.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Nice seeing everyone.
Gary, I'm presuming that you won't get on, or will you? You have your old school telephone from like the 1990s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's out of your league, I guess. All right, that's okay. We'll do the classic face-to-face thing over internet.
Okay, good. I like that.
Okay. All right, see you guys.
Salut.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.